What's going on, guys? It's Salted Neos here. I mentioned in the Home 100% video that it's a personal goal of mine to complete every single Pokedex in the series, including the spin-off games. So I've decided that I wanted to start a mini-series talking about some of the more interesting Pokedexes I've either completed or am very close to finishing. Videos on these games might just be a discussion video like this one, but I'm hoping in the future to be able to have a video of playing through some of the games I want to discuss. I've been playing Pokemon Go a lot recently because my entire family randomly got into it all of a sudden, so why don't we start here? I'm sure we all know at least one reason that the Go Pokedex is stupidly unrealistic to complete. The game's become infamous in recent times for several reasons by its player base, but I still hope I can pass on a bit of knowledge onto people who don't play Go, or at the very least keep you entertained as I go through my gripes, even if they're probably the same as everyone else. Before we continue, if you've been enjoying my content, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Lets me know you're enjoying the content and helps my channel continue to grow. Before we go any further than this, I need to lay out some ground rules as to what I'm discussing here today. Because first of all, Go doesn't actually have just one Pokedex. It has several bonus Pokedexes to fill out as well. I'm choosing to prioritize the base Pokedex, as the others I'd love to fill out, but they're not a priority as they're clearly bonuses and I doubt they're intended to be taken seriously. I'm not going for all forms either, as you can't easily track those in this game, and they aren't added to any counts, which is the same reason I won't go for it in most games. Notably, this excludes the infamous Galarian legendary birds, which are incredibly stupid to catch, but not actually necessary for the Pokedex if you got the Kanto ones in any of their more reasonable appearances. I'm also only discussing the game based on how it is now and how things that have already happened in the past have been. I'm not about to claim that, for example, Keldeo hasn't been made available to free-to-play players, but it might be released in Go Tour Unova, therefore it's completely fine. At that point I could just claim whatever I wanted and use "it's my opinion" as the only argument. I'm already probably going to miss something just due to how long this game has been going on and how many events there's been, so it's better to keep it to what I can actually prove, you know? Not every Pokemon has even been released yet in this game as of now either, so there's almost certainly going to be Pokemon that come out after this video that are also ridiculous to get, so I'd suggest checking the release date of this video if there's a huge outlier I don't discuss. And of course, I'm not counting cheating as a reasonable method to obtain a Pokemon, which includes buying them on eBay, which, yes, is a real thing in this game. This should go without saying, but people commented "use PK Hex" on my Home 100% video. If the thing in question is so stupid that you feel like you have to cheat for it, that probably means it's worth discussing here. Besides, Niantic has issued bans and slashed out Pokemon obtained through spoofing in the past, so they clearly don't want you doing this, and even if they didn't, I can't give Niantic credit for other people hacking their app to allow themselves to have reasonable access to a given Pokemon. They designed the game the way they did, so I'm discussing the game they officially released, not the game that comes from a sketchy third-party app store. Alright, the ground rules are laid out. Let's start with one of the oldest annoying Pokemon, Ditto. Ditto isn't all that bad compared to everything else, but if you're not catching literally everything, you're forced to keep up with which Pokemon can be disguised as Ditto whenever you're playing if you're looking for one. I'd show which Pokemon Ditto could be at this moment in time, but it changes so often that me doing so would be outdated in a week. I don't think Ditto is really all that bad compared to some other Pokemon. You just need one, and they've given it out in several events at this point, and will almost certainly do so again, seeing as it's required for the Mew quest anyways, but I figured I'd probably have someone mention it if I didn't. Of course, there's another group of Pokemon that started with Kanto, but has continued to be problematic for people completing their dexes in this game for years now, regional Pokemon. Anyone who plays Go knows them, and probably hates them, for good reason. I get the idea was to make each part of the world feel like it has something unique going on and has a different regional Pokemon, but this has some serious biasing issues towards places like the United States having access to 8 area-specific regional Pokemon in Tauros, Corsola, Heracross, Pachirisu, Carnivine, Buffalant, Comfey, and Maractus. Meanwhile, I live in one of the only places on the planet with 0 area-specific regionals. I'm aware not all of the US regional Pokemon are across the entire United States, of course. However, Tauros is certainly across the entire country. Here in Newfoundland, we don't get access to any area-specific regional Pokemon. And while I might be comparing a province to a country here, which is somewhat unfair, I'll admit, Canada doesn't have a regional that spans the entire country. Pachirisu only appears in the northern half of the country, and everywhere else in Canada, aside from Newfoundland, gets Tauros, as its range is cut off right before it would reach Newfoundland on the east end of its range for no real reason. I'm aware this is probably never gonna change either, as Newfoundland's a small enough part of Canada that no one outside of us actually cares if we get access to any of these Pokemon. However, getting one less Pokemon than every other place on the planet has annoyed me since release, so you bet I'm gonna bring this up here. I don't get why the rest of Southern Canada is allowed to have Tauros and we're not, but I guess Niantic loves trolling Newfoundland. It really would not be that hard to extend either the range of Tauros or Pachirisu to include us. Pachirisu is a very fitting Pokemon to be encounterable here anyways, as most of the island is either forests or small towns. I wouldn't be surprised if they were unaware we didn't get Pachirisu and the rest of the country did, but getting this to their attention and them actually doing something about it is so unlikely that I doubt this is ever going to change. The Hemisphere Regionals are not that much of an issue, I might as well add. They often get placed in events to make them available to all players during certain time periods, so you're likely to have at least some of them if you're playing often. Even the rarer ones like the Lake Trio have been in raids you can remote raid for if you have a contact in the correct region or use a remote raiding app. The true regionals, though, only get given to people who pay for ticketed events most of the time unless they're super old. So unless you travel a lot, good luck with getting those. There's a particular regional Pokemon who has caused many unrelated issues due to terrible foresight on Niantic's part, Mr. Mime. This was one of the stupidest choices for a regional Pokemon they could have possibly picked, and that's for one simple reason: Mime Jr. You see, Mime Jr. has been the root cause of multiple issues related to Mr. Mime. One of which being the fact that releasing Galarian Mr. Mime, and by extension Mr. Rhyme, at any given time is really awkward for Niantic to do. While the Galarian form wasn't out at the time they made the choice to make Mr. Mime a regional, Mime Jr. was out for 10 years in the main series at that point, so it's hard to give them any sympathy for the situation they got put into. With Galarian Farfetched's release, they were able to just put it into 7km eggs so that everyone had fair access to Surfetched, alongside a 2-day event where it was a normal spawn in the wild. The issue with doing that for Mr. Mime is that they can't because it's not the first stage of its line. Mime Jr. is. Mind you, this hasn't stopped them from doing that during GoFest 2022 anyways. This hasn't stopped them from releasing Galarian Mr. Mime though, which is somewhat surprising given how getting around situations like this usually takes them until the entire gen in question has been otherwise released for years. The first time it came out was in paid research, which is a terrible way to release a Pokemon for the first time. We'll come back to this issue later, cause there's a far worse offender. It later ended up appearing in GoFest 2022 as an encounter for ticketed players, which again still sucks to see it being paywalled. It finally made its free release in the GoFest finale in 2022 as an egg Pokemon during the Pheromosa habitat. Why they didn't just keep it there, who knows? It's not like Farfetch isn't already in the egg pool nowadays. After that though, it was a raid boss in the Psychic Spectacular in 2023. Nowadays it's often one of the Pokemon you can possibly get as a research breakthrough, where it probably should stay for the rest of time if you ask me if they can't find another spot to put it. Mr. Mime's an old enough regional at this point that leaving the Galarian form accessible does no harm to them. Every local community in this game has several people who have tons of the Kanto form available for anyone who wants it. All of this is before even talking about how obnoxious obtaining Mime Jr. is outside of Europe. Mime Jr. is particularly annoying to get because any events where you can get them outside of Europe have to be egg events, and they always seem to pick 7km eggs for this. So if you're not lucky enough to hatch one during that time, better luck next time in a year or two when they start to allow it again. I've personally only ever hatched one of these guys, and it's being kept real safe in case I can trade it for something I need in one of the game's alternative Pokedexes. Due to an error in putting the egg pools back to normal after the recent Cleffa Hatch Day event, Mime Jr. isn't even available in Europe right now. They just forgot to put it back into 5km eggs. So if you're going to Europe anytime soon, sorry to say you're not getting any Mime Juniors. Remember how I said Galarian Mr. Mime's initial release was terrible due to not being obtainable at all by free-to-play players? We need to talk about Keldeo now. Keldeo has only ever been released a single time ago, as paid special research back in December of 2022. This has issues, the first of which being, Keldeo is a mythical Pokemon. It is untradeable, meaning it is literally impossible to have this Pokemon unless you paid for it. If you didn't hear of this event because you were taking a break, or just refused to support paywalling the regular release of a mythical Pokemon, a camp which I personally fall into, too bad! You're not allowed to finish your Pokedex at all. Sucks to be you. It's also been over a year since that research released, with no indications of any plans to make it available anytime soon. You might mention they will probably release it for free-to-play players finally in Univitor next year, but that's just it. Probably. Until we see actual proof that this is going to happen, it can't be considered as fact. The last time they did this with a legendary before Keldeo was with Regigigas. But at least in that case, Regigigas came out in EX raids just a few weeks later. And regardless of how you feel about how those used to work, everyone at least had a chance of trying to get it for themselves until the pandemic started. There is no excuse for Keldeo to still not be released for free-to-play players at this point, and I hope that this finally changes in the near future, even if I'm doubtful it'll happen still. I know Keldeo isn't the only mythical who isn't permanently available, however, in the cases of Zarude and Hoopa, they at least at one point in time had special research that was free for all players to obtain. EX raids were a flawed system for obtaining Pokemon, but you know what? I think the successor to them, Elite raids, are not much better on that front. Elite raids are the only way to obtain an Amoris in Pokemon Go without trading, and at one point the only way to obtain Regieleki and Regidrago. Elite raids have serious issues. The first of which being, they only occur on a single day and only have 3 time slots, or 4 time slots in the case of an Amoris. They seem to only happen during Northern Hemisphere winter and spring, which where I live might as well just always be winter, but that wouldn't be much of an issue if you could use remote passes for these raids. Every single one of these raid days in Newfoundland has been on the day of a blizzard, or should have been on one but got rescheduled due to technical issues in the case of Regidrago, who got moved to a day which wasn't dangerous to go catch it, thankfully. The exception to the bad weather nonsense here, though, was Regieleki, who was on Easter Sunday of 2023, which is incredibly stupid as most people would prefer to spend Easter with their families instead. Anemoris was even worse than that, though, as it was on Valentine's Day of 2024. You know, a Wednesday! So any younger players who have school who might want to get Anemoris only have reasonable access to the 6 and 7 PM time slots, which while slightly better than only having the 5 PM time slot, is still stupid. Just put it on a weekend or give us 2 days or something. These raids are predatory and demand you to drop all other commitments in your life to go catch them. Even just making them appear over the weekend or something is a step in the right direction, but these raids might as well be ignored by any players in rural areas or towns with low player bases, as the inability to remote raid these Pokemon makes them unreasonably difficult to catch. I understand that Niantic is trying to go about making players stop using remote raid passes and get outside more, but this is a terrible way to go about doing this. Forcing people to drop all their commitments or go brave dangerous snowstorms for a raid battle which only exists on one day is fucked up. You have a system for accessibility for situations like this, and are actively trying to remove it. And no, I did not go and risk my safety for Anemoris, so no worries on that front. I do value my life more than a Pokemon in the mobile game. Leaving Anemoris is one of the last Pokemon I need to catch myself. Eggs have been in Pokemon Go since the beginning. However, in recent times, eggs are often being used to release several stupidly rare Pokemon. Larvesta has been available in 2, 5, and 10 kilometer eggs for a year now. The reason it's in all those different types of eggs at the same time, though, is that it's so obnoxiously rare that you need to hatch every egg you get that isn't a 7 or 12 kilometer egg if you want any hope of ever finding one. It's always been in the 5th tier of those eggs, being the rarest tier. That's not the whole story with Larvesta, though. Oh no, it gets worse. If you ever wanted to get yourself a Volcarona, you're gonna need 400 Larvesta candies. You'd hope that maybe they'd make it a 1 kilometer per candy Pokemon in that case, so you could walk it for a bit and finish it up easily. But no, it's a 5 kilometer per candy Pokemon. The highest amount that any non-legendary Pokemon can ask of you. Despite not playing a ton during the time I walked my Larvesta, I slowly over the course of like 6 months hit best buddies with it. And I only ended up getting 100 candies in that entire time period. And despite me not playing a lot during that time, I still walk all the time. I'm known to walk anywhere, even if it's a 3-hour round trip. The fact that I only got 100 candies should probably go to show you that you will 100% need either rare candies or to hatch several of these guys from 10 kilometer eggs specifically, as those eggs give you the most candies after hatching something to get this thing evolved. Larvesta isn't the only stupidly rare egg Pokemon though. While arguments can be made for Charcadet and Varoom being incredibly stupid, I've seen several of both hatch in recent times. The other really stupid and arguably worst egg Pokemon is Salandit. And yes, for those of you who don't play Pokemon Go, they made Salandit an egg exclusive. And not just any egg either. Oh no, that'd be too generous. It's only in 12-kilometer eggs. The eggs you get for beating Rocket admins. So every time you want to try again for getting a Salandit egg, you need to get 6 Rocket Grunts defeated, empty an egg slot, and beat an admin without filling up that egg slot. Thankfully, they do go to the bonus egg storage if that is an empty slot. So as long as you're being careful not to clog that with Adventure Sync eggs, you can usually have a slot open for one of these. Of course, for anyone who's played the series past Gen 7 though, they might be able to see why putting Salandit in these eggs is so awful. As Salandit can only evolve if female, which only 1 in 8 Salandit actually are. And yes, this is still true in Pokemon Go. Coupling this with the fact that Salandit until recently were in the rarest hatch tier for 12-kilometer eggs, and you have a Pokemon so rare that anyone I know who hatched one got it by accident, because the people who are actively looking to get one refuse to tolerate the system in place to get it. It's in the first tier 12-kilometer eggs now instead of the third tier, but this has done little to actually fix this problem, as you still have many other Pokemon you can hatch in this tier instead. I think I've actually hatched more Larvitar than Salandit from 12-kilometer eggs personally. I've hatched multiple Varoom since trying to get Salazzle as well, and while I've hatched many Salandit, 6 of them in fact, all 6 of them have been males. This is the last Pokemon I can actually get without trading, so it's my primary goal in the game right now to finally get one. Salted from the future here again. Because I was procrastinating this video for so long, I actually got my Salazzle during this video's production, after 9 of them hatched. I know this screenshot says exclamation point traded as a search term. Putting an exclamation point in front of a search term in Go removes the term from the search, and I had traded for someone else's males trying for a lucky. Honestly though, hatching it in 9 was lucky in itself. Someone I know who I do raid hour with every week apparently took 33 to get his, so I figured I'd throw in this small victory. Komala is a Pokemon who has been missing in the normal spawn pool since its release event, and I can't even say much about it because I wasn't playing the event it was a part of, so I don't actually know how common or rare it was during that event. I picked one up in a trade recently, and while that's cool and all, this is a regular Generation 7 Pokemon. Why is it not in the normal spawn pool? Is it just to sell more Pokemon Go++ by leaving the only accessible Komala in the special research that is unlocked for owning a $75 device? If yes, while I appreciate you giving at least 2 days for us to catch them normally, it's kinda stupid that you're paywalling Komala behind the Go++ now. I think we'd all appreciate it if it was either put into a season spawns as a rare spawn, or as just part of another event. Salted from the future once again. Komala has gotten a re-release at the beginning of June 2024, finally in another sleep-focused event. This still took an eternity to happen though, so I kept it in. Speaking of paywalls, at least technically, we've got the mascot of the Black Diamond Cheese Company, Gholdengo. Oh boy, where to even begin with this? Why don't we start with Gimmighoul, who can only be obtained by using either the coin bag item or very rarely on golden lure modules. How do you get these items? By connecting with Pokemon Scarlet or Violet, of course. Yep, just those games. Unlike, say, Meltan, where you could use Pokemon Home for getting the mystery box, which while slightly inconvenient is still free for everyone. The coin bag you can get once a day by sending a postcard from Go to the Generation 9 Pokemon games. And the Golden Lure module can be gotten in addition to the coin bag every 5 days you do this. Thankfully they don't even have to be in a row, so you can just get them over time from one friend with the game, you know, slowly. You can't hold more than one Gold Lure module at a time though. If you already have one in your bag on day 5 of connecting to Scarlet or Violet, it gets replaced by a measly 5 coins. If you're on the 5th day with one already in your inventory though, you can lay down your Gold Lure module, and then connect to the Gen 9 games for the day, and get another immediately, allowing you to set down 2 at the same time. Let's get the bigger problem out of the way though. How do you evolve a Gimmighoul? Why, it's quite simple, the exact same way as in Scarlet and Violet. Use 999 Gimmighoul coins on it! Yeah, they kept it exactly the same! How do you get these coins? The way you're probably more familiar with is catching Gimmighoul, where they can but don't always drop Gimmighoul coins. If you're set on getting coins this way, the better your throw is, the more coins they give you, so try for excellent throws if possible. Thankfully, Golden Lure modules come to the rescue here too, as when you spin one of those, you always get anywhere from 5 to 30 Gimmighoul coins per spin of the stop. The other thing about Gold Lure modules is that they're probably the only way any free-to-play player is ever getting this evolution. Since they're lure modules, that means they're free for everyone to use once they're set up. Honestly, gold lure modules are the only way anyone is ever getting this evolution, as their coin generation is far better than the coin bag. In a lot of communities, people tend to lay them down before or after community days and during some other events. If you ever see one set up and can go to it, it's probably worth your while to do so. Unown is another Pokemon who's infamous in Go for being obnoxious to obtain. Unown is one of the rarest natural spawns in the game. In fact, it's so rare to see that even if you've been playing daily since its release, you may not have seen a naturally occurring Unown. They often get put into ticketed events as an incense encounter, with the letters spelling out some word related to the event. Thankfully, it's been in eggs a couple of times in Go, yes, despite being in the undiscovered egg group in the main series, but more importantly has been a raid boss a few times. This does happen once every couple of years or so normally, so free-to-play players do have access to it during those events. It was also available to everyone during Go Tour Sinnoh with Incense, which was a welcome inclusion in that event. It's also technically obtainable while doing the research you get for hitting level 50, however the majority of us are never getting that Unown. It's notable that it can be any letter from that research though, so potentially even one of the ones people can't get currently without traveling to in-person events. Speaking of in-person events though, we've got to discuss one of the most disgusting Pokemon to get in Pokemon Go. Skiddo. So, Skiddo has this really awesome gimmick where it's only available to people who fly out to in-person Safari Zone events. Which might as well make Skiddo a regional on crack, as it's only available in very specific parts of the world, for a couple of days, and only then to people who bought a ticket to said event. And as you might have realized already, yes, that also means Go-Goat is tied behind this, which requires 50 Skiddo candies. So have fun throwing all your rare candy at Skiddo if you manage to trade for one. I'm fairly certain that I will personally never obtain this Pokemon, and quite frankly, the exclusivity here is fucking disgusting. There is no indication of when this exclusivity will end on Skiddo, but until that day, this is without question the single worst Pokemon to obtain in Pokemon Go, if not the entire Pokemon series. Before we go, why don't we talk about Go's alternative Pokedexes for a bit? Because they are indeed Pokedexes, so they might be of interest to discuss in my series of discussing games Pokedexes. Again, we'll be treating each of these as what they are, bonus Pokedexes that you shouldn't take too seriously. The Mega Pokedex is probably the only one of these you should actually care about, mostly just because having a Pokemon registered here means you can walk with the Pokemon to obtain its Mega Energy. There's not a whole lot else to say about it, just do Mega Raids if you don't have the Mega yet, play whenever the next Meteorite is made available so you can get access to Mega Rayquaza. You can also use party challenges to get access to some Mega Energy for the Megas you might have missed. The Shiny Pokedex is practically just a giant paywall, and I'm not just talking about the Masterwork researches either. I'm actually fine with those existing. Shinies are a cosmetic difference at the end of the day, and at least you know what you're buying in those cases. I'm talking about raid and egg exclusives. Mostly the raid exclusives due to every raid costing $1, but incubators are also a money sink. I think this one's kind of fun to fill up over time, but actively going for this as your goal might cause some serious salt when you miss regionals and events. The 3-star Pokedex I also go for personally, however if you miss even one Mythical as a 3-star, congrats, you will never get this Pokedex completed. My Meloetta happened to be a 2-star, meaning I actually can't finish this dex fully anymore. I'm also so sorry to those poor souls who bought Keldeo and got a 2-star if they were going for this dex. At least since they're just regular Pokemon, it's not that taxing to go for the ones you can get, between trading with people or just doing raids of Pokemon you don't have 3-star versions of yet. Just to make things even worse though, there's also a Pokedex for perfect Pokemon, or Pokemon with all perfect IVs. Yeah, no, just skip this one. Statistically, it's impossible to complete it due to trade-locked Pokemon existing, because you're not rolling every Mythical and Zygarde as Hundos. These two Pokedexes got added in an update, which means anything you evolved that could have counted for either of these two before that update came out are not counted. Which for me means I should have way more in the perfect dex than I do, but I can't really fault them for not thinking of adding it until years into the game's life. I'd probably care a little more if not for the trade-locked Pokemon. If you're really intent on getting as many as you can on the perfect Pokedex though, be aware that purifying Shadow Pokemon who have at least 13 out of 15 IVs in all their stats will purify into perfect Pokemon, as purifying a Pokemon will add 2 IVs to each of its stats. I wouldn't suggest doing this if the Pokemon in question is strong in raids, or you just don't care about this Pokedex, because even with the perfect IVs, the Shadow bonus applied to moves used by Shadow Pokemon makes their overall damage better than purified perfect Pokemon. Something like a Shadow Suicune from the recent Shadow raids, though, isn't going to be that useful in raids, so there's not really harm in purifying that. But a Shadow Raikou, I wouldn't suggest doing this with. If you like those last 2 Pokedexes, though, why not just combine the RNG of both into one ultra bad Pokedex in the shiny 3-star Pokedex? I can't even consider going for this, as I never get 3-star shinies. But more importantly, because my Mew, Celebi, and Jirachi are all 2-star. I don't think this one should even exist. I can see at least why they exist separately. All this one does is make you feel bad every time you get a shiny, and it's bad if you decide you want to care about this dex in the first place. However, considering it's not entirely unlikely that this dex becomes impossible to complete, I would recommend not going for this one seriously. Thank God the shiny perfect Pokedex doesn't exist, as I wouldn't even have it unlocked yet, as I have never gotten a shiny perfect Pokemon. The event Pokedex, I don't even think I need to discuss why it's unrealistic. Getting every single event Pokemon in Go isn't happening if you haven't been both playing since launch and going to every single in-person event. It's just a cool place to see all your event costumes. Even if you somehow end up in my situation and you have an entire page of Pikachu. But you know, whatever, Pikachu's iconic, they have to do so many of them, I guess. Anyway. The Shadow Dex is one I'm personally going for, but talking about this one is really hard because 1, it had a pair of Shadow regional raids in Sock and Throw, which is literally impossible to ever get both of them if you didn't travel during that very specific window of time, as you can't remote pass into Shadow raids, but you can't even trade for them because Shadow Pokemon are trade locked due to purification, creating insanely easy access to perfect Pokemon when Shadow Pokemon become lucky. This trade lock also makes catching up on shadows you miss usually impossible, because only a small handful are ever available at a given time. Purified Dex is literally the same as the Shadow Dex, except you can trade for them. The exact same Pokemon are in both of them, and honestly, it's still just hard to talk about them. The one thing that makes the Purified Dex worse though is that most Shadow Legendaries are only able to be gotten once at release, and because the Shadow bonus is so strong, no matter how bad the IVs in your Shadow Legendary are, it's still better to leave it unpurified. So you're most likely waiting on the Shadow raids for a given Legendary to get that Purified entry. Personally for me, I missed all the Legendary birds from Kanto and Johto, so I'm behind by quite a few. The last one to talk about is the Lucky Pokedex. Another one I recently started to go for, as I nearly finished my 3-star dex and needed another goal. Honestly, this one's been kinda fun to go for, though it has some problems. First things first, what even is a Lucky Pokemon? A Lucky Pokemon is a Pokemon who will always have minimum IVs in all stats of 12 and costs half as much Stardust to level up. In order to get a Lucky Pokemon, you need to get lucky when trading Pokemon with another player. You can get higher odds on getting a Lucky Pokemon through trading if you trade an older Pokemon, maxing out at 20% for Pokemon who are 3 years old or older. Because a given Pokemon can only be traded a single time, you can't trade for already lucky Pokemon, so you're stuck rolling the dice every time. There are a couple of ways you can ensure the Pokemon you receive will be lucky as well. The first one is by interacting with your best friends on your friends list. When you interact with a person you're already at max friend level with in Pokemon Go, you occasionally become lucky friends. When you do a trade with a lucky friend, the Pokemon involved in the trade will automatically become lucky, no matter how old they are. The other way you can force a lucky Pokemon is a bit harder to utilize. If a Pokemon who is from a certain year or earlier is traded, the Pokemon in the trade can be forced to be lucky. But it's not that simple, unfortunately. See, there are some conditions that need to be met for this method to work. First things first, the person sending the old Pokemon can't have participated in this type of forced lucky trade more than a certain number of times. I have to word this generally because Niantic occasionally increases the amount of these trades a player can participate in, and which year the Pokemon can be caught from. Right now, players can do 25 of these forced lucky trades, and the Pokemon can be from 2018 or older. However, because Niantic logic, it's still more complicated than that, much to the annoyance of all involved. Let's just say I've done 25 of these forced lucky trades, and someone who hasn't done any of them yet sends me 5 Pokemon from 2018. After those trades happen, I'll have participated in 30 of these types of trades. Now let's say Niantic tomorrow increases the cap to 30 of these trades per account. Because I accepted those 5 Pokemon from that other player, I will not be allowed to do any more forced lucky trades still, because the game will still count those other trades I did toward the total. The only thing that this cap actually does is prevent this mechanic from kicking in if I was the one to trade the 2018 Pokemon in that previous scenario. Thankfully, doing a lucky trade with a player you're at Lucky Friends with does not count toward the total. There are a few Pokemon that you probably aren't going to manage to get lucky if you didn't already do them, namely Cosmog and Poipole. These two are limited access Pokemon who aren't always available, and you only get a limited amount of them per account. You only get 1 Poipole if you didn't buy the Wonder Ticket during Season of Wonders, and only 2 free Cosmog have been available as of now. Which doesn't mean that people will have a spare Cosmog necessarily, because that second one is to make getting the other legendary out of Solgaleo and Lunala obtainable. You could buy another of each to have a spare, but most of us probably didn't do that just to trade them off. If you don't know someone who has one of theirs unevolved and doesn't mind trading it to you, you can't finish this dex. A small update that happened during production, a third free Cosmog has been confirmed for GoFest 2024 on day 2, with ticket holders getting another Solgaleo or Lunala encounter of their choice. If you have any interest in getting the Lucky Dex done, be sure to plan with someone to trade a Cosmog and the evolution with. If you get the opportunity to trade for either of these Pokemon, or one of Cosmog's final evolutions, make sure that you can guarantee that the trade is going to be lucky using one of the previous mechanics, as you probably won't get another chance. In fact, this applies to any Pokemon you won't have easy access to, like foreign regionals for example. Pokemon Go's Pokedex is a bit of an ongoing struggle, as Niantic are very slowly releasing new Pokemon all the time in this game. While I might not be caught up on all of it yet, and probably won't ever fully catch up, I don't overall hate this game and do have fun playing it to some extent. It's a fun social event, and getting a trade set up for someone for one of the rare regional Pokemon, or getting a new lucky legendary for me to use in raid battles is satisfying for sure. However, it'd be hard to call this game a reasonable Pokedex to complete, especially with things like Elite Raids, Keldeo, or Skiddo still in the picture. But playing this game over time, just as something to do and hang out with people, or playing the big festival-like events, being the Global Go Fests or Global Go Tours, I can recommend trying it at least once if you've got a friend group down for it. Thank you all so much for getting me to 1100 subscribers. It means the world to me that so many people are enjoying my content, and I hope I can continue to provide you all with content you enjoy. I'd like to thank you all again so much for watching. Later on, boys, and as always, take care.